Hello, everyone. Hi. Hi, hi, hi. Okay, I just realized that I just got back into town. By the way, welcome back to Plant Consciousness Commentary. I just got back into town, and when I go out of town for a long period of time, I break down my entire setup because I bring it with me. I do not have two setups. So I just set it up yesterday, and I'm like, I don't feel centered, and I'm not sure if I need to be centered, but I don't feel centered. So I was just like, unfortunately, YouTube does not allow you to look at the stream before you hit go. So the only way I can see it is to actually be live. But that's okay. We're here. We're done. It's all set up. I actually set up much faster than I usually do. So I'm not hating on it. I am very happy. I set my camera back up. The microphone's easy. The microphone I kind of break it down on a regular basis anyway. I know people have those kind of arms and everything that sticks up, but I don't know. I kind of just like it right here. I like to be able to like grab it and bring it up. And so everything got set up relatively quickly this time around. But, the centering part, and I'm still working on the lighting. We are in the middle of that time period. Now it's going to get better because now obviously there's more light during the day, and I have everything set up to turn on external lights if necessary. Right now I'm going with mainly natural lighting, and I think it looks pretty nice. I have seen some of my podcast episodes are pretty bad. I am still working on what to do when there is no natural light. But anyways, that's not what we're here to talk about. We are here to finish up something that we started a while back. Actually, I was just counting earlier before we started how many sessions did we do of plant consciousness commentary to get to where we are today. Because where we are today, so let me give a recap of what it is that we're going to be doing today, how we got here, everything around it. So if you're new, hello. Welcome to Plant Consciousness Commentary. I am your host, Tigria Gardenia. And, I kind of just published the trailer because I realized, remember, I had been, for those of you that have been watching for a while, you know that YouTube is kind of weird. I still don't understand this interface, and I'm debating on whether or not to go back to StreamYard. If you have a favorite interface that you use or in order to go live and do live streaming, please let me know. I'm not sold on anything yet. Most people have recommended StreamYard. There's one other that somebody recommended to me, but I haven't had a chance to try it out, so I don't want to mention it until I have that chance. And so for now, I'm just using YouTube Studio, and it's not bad. It just has a few little quirks that I don't know how to deal with, and I don't know if that's just the way that it always is. So, but as I am still, even though I have been doing plant consciousness commentary for a few years now, I haven't really been that 100%. I mean, I've been consistent, but I haven't really, I don't know. I just feel like I'm still a newbie. I think because I started this very similar time frame to when I started the podcast, and I put a lot of energy into making the podcast work because I feel like the podcast is a place where I express myself in a different way. So now that the podcast is solid, really solid, actually, it looks awesome. I am just loving this season of the podcast. Now that the podcast is solid, I am reverting my attention here. And so, especially because this series that we've been working on has been extremely, what's the right word? Inspiring, to be honest. So let me give you a recap. First of all, again, if you're new, what do we do here? What do I do is I am a plant intelligence specialist. I am called a world ambassador for plant advocacy. So understanding the science, the arts, and the humanities, and also the spiritual world connected to plants is my jam. I love all things plants. I love working with plants. I am the founder of the Naturally Conscious Community, which is the number one or the only one, I think, community out there for human-plant relations. It's really the place for us to develop this relationship, working and co-creating with plants. And so plant consciousness commentary was an extension of this, because much of the literature that is out there and much of the work that is being done on study and understanding and development of the critical plant studies, of the plant humanities, of plant intelligence and plant sentience and plant consciousness from an academic perspective comes through the world of papers and journals and all these types of things, which can be a little hard to read, just a little bit. Anyway, so I started to break these down for you because I feel like there is a lot of good stuff there. And also for those that come from a purely 100% academic perspective, you're sort of limited in what you can say, probably because you're worried about your job. It's also, you're trying to build the credibility in the science that you work in, where I don't have any of those limitations, right? I am a nature-inspired mentor. I am a life coach. I work very closely with the music of the plants as well as many other areas. I am an engineer. I am a spiritual teacher. I have a very varied and eclectic background because I am a multi-passionate and multi-potentialite. And so not having the limitations of being bound by an academic kind of path or having to satisfy that, I have a lot of freedom to really speak what I feel, what I experience, and what my clients and students feel and experience. And that is the reason why Plant Consciousness Commentary came to be. So we have, if you go onto my website and you just go to griagardenia.com/commentary, which you can find in the description, you will see that I have been doing this for a long time. I have broken down all kinds of papers. We started off kind of back at the beginning, the beginning of the modern era, let's say it that way, because right now in the Plant Wisdom Book Club, we're reading a book called Chase Mimosa, which is the psychology of plants. And Chase Mimosa is fascinating because it goes back to, Plato and Socrates Plato and Aristotle having conversations about the sentience of plants. So this is a conversation that humanity has been having with and usually about plants for thousands of years, literally. So I picked up at around 2006. This is really where we start to discuss the kind of, bigger conversations start to happen and more research starts to happen around the idea of plant intelligence. And then moving from plant intelligence, you have the birth of critical plant studies, you have the beginning of the plant humanities, and then you have everything connected to plant sentience. Sometimes you will see the words plant consciousness, but plant consciousness is even more controversial than plant sentience. And so, here we are. So there is lots of research. I have hundreds of papers on my list to go through, even though I have already gone through hundreds with you. And I will continue to do this work. Everything is on YouTube and in the Naturally Conscious community, as well as on my website. So you can find everything that I have published, that I have commented on, including the links in the resources for you to be able to find the actual paper. I try to look for papers that are not behind a paywall. Every once in a while, they are behind a paywall. I try to then figure out how to get them from the paywall, sometimes paying for them, sometimes having great friends that work in academia that can help me out. I do have a master's degree in vegetal future, which is plant social innovation and design from the University of Florence under Stefano Mancuso, which if you are in this world, you will know his name, as well as Leonardo Chiesi, who is a sociologist in the built environment. So it's not that I don't have the academic part. I have the academic part. I live in one of the largest spiritual eco communities in the world, which is Damanhur in Italy. So there's my spiritual side, as well as many other pieces. And I happen to be a music engineer, which gives me another aspect of the sciences as well as the artistic piece. I don't know why I'm giving you my whole background. I think because I've been away for about 2 weeks and it feels like, I lose people. So I give you my entire background, but that's the way it is. So let's talk about what we're going to be doing today. My hope is that this is going to be the conclusion of this series that we have done. This series has now expanded across 6 different sessions together, which has been really fun and super interesting. And it all starts with a paper by Miguel Segundo-Ortin and Calvo called Plant Sentience. Between Romanticism and Denial, Science. Now, this paper comes out in 2023 in the Journal of Animal Sentience, which is an interdisciplinary journal on animal feeling. And what Paco Calvo and Miguel Segundo-Ortin, or as we delightfully call them as SOC, just for shorthand, what do? They put out a paper that says, we believe that plants are sentient, and these are the reasons why we believe them, scientifically speaking. Now, both of these are people that have been working. Paco Calvo in particular has been, because I know him a lot better than Segundo-Ortin, although I have read and we have commented on together many of Segundo-Ortin's papers. So Paco Calvo in particular is one of the original founders of plant neurobiology as a discipline. He wrote the manifesto on plant neurobiology. He is a philosopher, but who works very much in the biological sciences and in this particular area of plants and plant sentience. He is very methodical. He wrote the book Plant to Sapiens several years ago, which we read as the Plant Wisdom Book Club. It's a great book. And Paco Calvo in particular is very methodical. He does not just throw things around. Hence, what did they do? SO and C, so Segundo-Ortin and Calvo, what do? They put out this paper. They outline all the different reasons why, scientifically speaking, neurobiologically speaking to a certain extent, plant neurobiology, not human neurobiology, they believe that plants are sentient beings and that we have enough evidence to recognize the sentience of plants. Now, there are a whole heck of a lot of people who do not agree. So what do? They say at the end of this, but don't take our word for it. We want you to tell us whether you believe that plants are sentient and why. And if you do not believe in plants are sentient, what is it that you believe is missing? Hence why they called it Between Romanticism and Denial is Science, because they feel like there are people on one end, that would be mine, which are all about romanticism. In other words, we inherently believe plants are sentient. Mind you, again, talking about my background, being somebody that is on the edge of everything. In other words, I span across multiple things. I can use things like plant communication and when I say plant communication, in my particular perspective is me communicating with plants as part of my confirmation that plants are sentient. But obviously from a scientific perspective, that would be considered kind of metaphysical and it's a little bit too far. Although there are some in this world who are very highly regarded, that are using very metaphysical, indigenous also aspects in order to prove plant sentience. But anyways, neither here nor there. Romanticism would be somebody like me who is probably on one end an extreme, and it would be hard for you to convince me that plants are not sentient. Although, as you've heard all of my commentary, I try to be very fair to all the people who are, neurobiologists and such, who are working on plant sentience from that perspective. On the other end, there is denial. There are the hardcore human neurobiologists or animal neurobiologists that are saying outright, absolutely not. Not only are plants not sentient, they will never be sentient. There's no reason for us to even think they're sentient. And this is a useless conversation to continue to have. So that's the denial side, which is really fascinating right now, because as we have been reading Chase Mimosa, which is about the psychology of plants, so it is the opening of plant psychology and plant cognition as a discipline within this world, right? Remember, we talk about plants, the bringing of plants as an intelligent being into the conversation has been a very slow evolving process from, the early days of Socrates and Plato, who were arguing pretty much of what does the vegetative soul, or what in modern terms we would call a mind, actually mean when it comes to plants. Because I think at some point, if you look through the past history, really the way we used to talk about mind was as soul. Soul and mind were the same thing. And there are some really interesting psychological researchers over the years that have very interesting conversations relating to mind and soul as to whether or not they are the same thing or two sides of the same thing. But we're not going to get there. We're not going to open up that discussion right now. So, they put out this call. They say, here are our points once again as to why, from a scientifically practical reasoning, and even with our own experimentation, we believe plants are sentient. And we're going to put a call out. We're inviting you to tell us why we're wrong, because we want to use that as where are we going to do our research going further. So that was the first of the sessions that I did, was we went through and we broke down their entire paper. Then we started looking at all the replies. So far, we have gone through 5 different sessions where we have been talking about the different replies. The replies are mainly against plant sentience. Let's just be honest. Let's just say where we are. It's mainly been against plant sentience, but not only. I mean, there is some talk, and there have been those that have been having pretty interesting conversations, especially one specific paper that I really, really, really enjoyed, because that particular paper, which was, hold on, I'll give you the name of it. Complex floral behaviors of angiosperm. No, wait, is it that one? Yes, which is a paper that basically says, we're looking at this all wrong. You are trying to define plant intelligence using a scale of human intelligence and of human and of animal physiology as well as behavior. And of course, that's not going to work, because the physiology and the behavior of plants is different. So you have to use a whole different mechanism, and that is really what's missing. So most of the people that have been kind of descendant voice, no, it's not the word I was looking for. The dissent, in other words, of the mainstream, which is that plants are neither sentient nor intelligent, has been around the idea of, we're looking at this wrong. We have to stop thinking in animal terms. It is and we need to, and I put it as, we need to go back to before we even understood, which is why this book on Chase Mimosa is actually quite fascinating for me, because before we ever had any of the physiology, we were ascribing, again, soul to what today is considered mind. And so when we look at that, I think it helps us understand how all of the modern neurobiology and the neuroscience came to be, and how it was that we started to put physiology to what we were experiencing, both for humans as well as for general animals altogether. And even so, we are still debating the intelligence of certain types of animals. So it's not even a given that just because we are talking about intelligence and we recognize intelligence, do we recognize cognition? So, we're still treating crows or other kinds of animals that use tools that have certain behaviors that are very much intelligent, and we're still having arguments as to whether or not they're truly sentient. Because again, we're trying to attribute that to animals, and then, to humans, and then to primates who are very similar to humans. And so we're not remembering that there was a time when we didn't have any kind of definition, and what did it look like to define one, to develop one, and how can we do that for beings as different of ourselves like plants are. So there have been a few voices here that have brought that into place. There have been a few that are saying, we don't really believe plants are sentient, but we leave it open because we feel like there's still conversation to be had. And then there's been the outrights, absolutely not, this is not possible. So today we are going to hopefully go over the last of the papers that we have that will help us better understand this argument, and then also the revised paper by Miguel Segundo-Ortin and Paco Calvo about what their conclusions are at the end of all of these other papers. So they took all of the papers that were submitted, all the responses or replies, they evaluated all of them, and then they wrote a revised version of their original paper and document. So that is my hope for today. It's a pretty ambitious hope to get through all of these. Most of these are not very long. I welcome, of course, as always, all of your comments. I also welcome your subscriptions and your likes and your shares and all of that good stuff that makes the algorithm recognize, hey, this is something worth watching. Hopefully you think it's worth watching. And please feel free to add all your questions in the chat as we go. I will grab them and use them and hopefully be able to answer them. So, but mostly I just like all of your, your presence. Okay, so that being said, I have now rambled on for 20 minutes. Let's hope I can do this correctly because this is kind of tricky as to how I share. Okay, so we're going to go on to the next paper, Honest. Remember, everything is on Plant Consciousness Commentary. You can which is on YouTube as well as on my own website and inside of the Naturally Conscious community. You can find all the previous papers that we're going into. So here is our first paper. Let me set it up correctly and grab some tea. I am a big tea drinker. One of the most wonderful things about coming home is to be able to drink my tea. I end up buying a lot of tea when I'm out, especially because I have certain little corners of the world where I like to get certain types of teas. But I tend not to drink them until I get home because I don't want to open them unless I know how to. I can take care of them. So this is a Genmai cha, which is one of my favorites. Genmai cha and the matcha are like my absolute favorites, as well as certain kinds of black teas. Okay, so this paper is called Animal Communication and Sentience. Now, just again, if you're new around here, let me walk you through how I do this because I feel like it's really useful for us to understand. So we first look at, of course, the title. And we know that this is all commentary on SOC's Plant Sentience paper, their original. This is by Katia Correa Cairo. She must be Portuguese, it sounds by the name, and another Katia, just spelled in a different way, Liebel. That's awesome. So what do? I always go through their descriptions first. Why? Because it helps us understand what orients them. If there are neurobiologists, if there are people that work in agriculture, this is going to make it much more difficult for you to be able to, I'm broad strokes here, folks, broad strokes, but you tend to see a lot more resistance in people who work in agriculture as well as in human animal neurobiology. You also see some resistance coming from animal communicators, which is kind of funny because it's almost as if they have worked so hard to bring, and this is what they say. I'm paraphrasing, but a lot of them have expressed this. They have to work so hard to bring visibility and understanding to animal communication that they feel like focusing on plants almost diminishes what they've done. It's almost like they're afraid that everybody's going to lump general animals together alongside plants and everything's going to go to shit. So we always look at the description just to see. So for example, Correa Cairo is a senior researcher at the Human Biology and Primate Cognition Research Group. Okay. So this is a person who has spent again, broad strokes, folks, probably spent a lot of times trying to understand the cognitive capacities of primates and domestic animals, which means she has struggled a lot to bring legitimacy to that. And so it'll be interesting to see what she says when it comes to, she's focused on non-human animals. Her frame of reference is animal world. Katia Liebel is also a professor of human biology at the same place. She's the head of the Human Biology and Primate Cognition Research Group. So again, it sounds like she's been investigating communication in primates and humans, right? How it is that they connect to animals. So these are animal advocates. And the Plant Initiative, which is an organization, an academic organization that brings together the idea of plant communication, plant humanities, and critical plant studies, has done an excellent job last year of writing up a paper of expressing why animal communication and animal advocacy is not necessarily the right path for us to take in order to develop plant advocacy and plants communication strategies, because again, that whole path has had a very anthropocentric, like in other words, trying to get people to accept animal intelligence by thinking about how close animals are to humans. And you see that even here in the description, right? Primates and domestic animals is the different species that these people work on, and they are the communication of primates and human children's attitudes toward other animals, right? They are using very much an approach that focuses on anthropomorphizing or helping us better feel compassionate for other animals because we are animals as well. Fair enough. Great work, fair enough. But plants are a whole different ballgame, and it requires an entirely different kind of conversation. And so therefore, many of these people who have worked so hard and who have a track that is about comparing to humans struggle with trying to look at plants because plants need to go through their own track, which is not by comparing the plants to humans. So it's just a very different way of approaching the world. So let's read the abstract. SO and C argue for sentience in plants on the basis of several studies and what they described as cognitive abilities in plants. As other commentaries have pointed out, however, there is some misuse of several concepts and a lack of evidence for sentience. We try to clarify 3 questions in S&C's discussion. 1, how is communication defined and conceptualized in animal research? 2, is plant communication comparable to animal communication? I can give you the answer to that. It's going to be no, nor should it be. 3, is animal communication, or the process we see in plants, a good basis for inferring sentience in plants? So 1, what is animal communication? Strict criteria are needed for research on communication in non-human animals because they cannot do self-report, which is a big thing. And especially with plants, we can't even use behavioral cues that we are used to using in non-human animals. So it becomes a very different way of approaching the world. The definition of animal communication, particularly in primates, often requires the concept of intentionality. And, we often try to understand animal communication by trying to force the animal, the non-human animal, to behave and speak like and act like a human. And so we try to use that criteria, which definitely doesn't work with plants, nor should it really work for animals, but who am I to say that? Anyway, in which the signal indicates the goal of the sender to the receiver. Within intentionality, which is one of the topics that Segundo-Ortin and Calvo do cover, and the idea that many signals that are put out by plants have an intentional destination, but there are those that argue that point. So there are those that believe that there is intentionality in plant communication, and there are those that believe that plants just send out a signal and just send out a signal. I can't even say in the hopes that somebody is going to receive it, which to me sounds still intentional, but for whatever reason that doesn't get recognized. Don't ask me why. I haven't figured that out. With intentionality, there is a growing level of cognitive complexity depending on the sender and receiver's ability to understand one another's mental states during communicative exchanges. So, for example, sender, cute little monkeys. So 0 order is no mentality or intentionality in both the sender or the receiver. So I yell, but I don't expect anybody to receive that. I don't know, I guess. E.g., alarm call due to arousal. First order, sender produces a signal with the intention to produce a response in the receiver, but receiver still has no mentality or intentionality and does not need to recognize the intention of the sender. E.g., so an example is an alarm call to make a receiver hide. Second order is adds the first order by requiring that the receiver attributes intentionality to the sender. So an alarm call that makes the receiver hide and knows that there is a danger. Third order is sender intends for the receiver to attribute to sender the intention of the signal. So the alarm call is intended to be understood by the receiver as sender intending them to hide due to danger. So it's the difference between hearing an alarm that is like a general alarm that goes off and I hide, but the other thing is knowing that the sender sent me that alarm in order for me to hide. With order, sender and receiver mutually understand the sender's goal and intention, that the receiver understands the goal. Both the sender and the receiver understand that the alarm call is intended to make the receiver hide and that the sender had that goal when the call was produced. According to Ulrich et al., non-human animals have at least first-order intentionality. Second-order intentionality is considered a marker of human-like communication. A list of criteria has been used to test intentionality in a variety of species, probably all founded from a human base, but that's mine. Which criteria are used and how many varies across studies, but they help in distinguishing what is and not intentional communication. The criteria include C1, social use between sender and receiver. The signal must be directed by the sender at the receiver. C2, the sender's sensitivity to receiver's attention. The signal is only if the receiver is attentive and able to receive it. So I don't just put it out unless I know that there's somebody who's going to receive it. Sender's consideration of receiver's attention. The sender adjusts the signal's sensory modality to the attentional state of the receiver. So this is, I modify my receiver. Okay, I'm going to hold my thought. I have a thought right now that is very much connected to that one paper that I was telling you that said think differently, but I'm going to hold it for a second. Do plants communicate? There seems to be a large gap between the way animal communication is defined and the way SNC describe plant communication. To assess whether plants communicate, we need to examine SOC's claims in terms of intentionality criteria suitably modified to be applicable to plants. SONC suggests that communication between plants occurs when they release volatile organic compounds during a stressful event, e.g. being eaten. This allows other plants to detect the VOX and triggers defense mechanisms. However, being able to detect VOX in the environment is not communication. It is behavior reading at best, or more parsimoniously, it is just environmental cue reading. More important, considered as between VOC release during stretch does not have a directed goal. It fails to meet criteria 1. VOC release is only an internal for the plant to react to the stress. It is picked up incidentally by neighboring plants, which in turn react to it. To infer second-order communication, SONC would need to demonstrate that the plants releasing the VOX intended to inform other plants. Two things come to mind. 1, if they did not intend for it to be received, why would they send it? Because remember, plants need all the energy that they can use because they don't know when they're going to get more energy, right? They don't understand. They don't know if the sun is going to shine tomorrow. They don't understand if they're going to hit some patch of food. So they're very good at being intentional with their, well, nobody here would say intentional, but with modifying their energy. If a plant didn't believe that somebody else was going to receive this signal, why put it out? That's my first question. Second question is, how do you know? All of these things say a plant is not doing this, but you do not tell me how you know. What would be the thing you would have to see? Here's what I want to see. I want to see a paper that tells me what the plant would want, what the scientist would expect to see in order to agree that the plant is intentionally sending this signal. Like, hold on a second, folks. I just got a message that said that there's a problem with my live stream. Oh, hold on, folks. We have a problem. I don't even know if it's going to let me do this. Okay, hold on. I think, let me just tell somebody here. Check. Mm. Oh, how annoying. So it looks like I had actually organized a stream. Tells you how bad. I remember I told you at the very beginning that me and YouTube are struggling. I am struggling with YouTube. Don't ask me why. So apparently I started a stream, but I had a stream scheduled for 6 o'clock. And so some people found the 6 o'clock stream. Well, 6 o'clock. I don't know, 6 o'clock my time. In other words, some people found my stream and didn't. Oh, because this is unlisted. Holy bejeez. Why would YouTube ah, talking about strange. YouTube allowed me to start a stream privately. So I am broadcasting. I have been broadcasting for the last half an hour with a untitled screen, with something that is private, basically. So nobody could see it. How ridiculous is that? So annoying. That was why I was like, why is this not? I had a bunch of people who told me they were going to be here, and I was like, well, looks like none of them came. And all right, folks, for those of you that have been around the whole time, luckily you can start a stream from the very beginning. And I thank you for your patience. I have no idea why I did that, but it was quite obnoxious. Okay. So let me write one more message to everybody. Sorry. I am so frustrated with YouTube right now. And so, yeah, I have to get this. Okay. Thank you for your patience as I message everybody and tell them that. Okay, sorry, I'm like messaging everybody again, telling them that it is now public. Can you believe that? YouTube allows you to start a live stream with the visibility set to private, which means that nobody can see the video on my YouTube page unless they have, it actually sets it to unlisted. So unless you have the direct link. Isn't that crazy? So I just did half an hour of live stream with nobody being able to see it. That explains so much. Sorry, my hair is kind of driving me nuts right now. Besides the fact that it's also hot here. Okay. Okay, breathe. Take it up, breathe. I told you, if you have a suggestion for what to use instead of the YouTube studio, please let me know, because I am seriously looking for it. I could try, StreamYard again. In the perspective of streaming, it was a lot easier, but the reach, anyway, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to keep going because luckily I checked, right? If I hadn't checked, I would have never seen it. I am having all kinds of technical issues. This is a great example of a growing pain. Like pretty soon I'm going to need to have somebody who's going to do this with me. So again, luckily you can rewind all the way to the beginning in YouTube, and hopefully you will enjoy it, because here it is. This is where we are. Okay, so let's try again. Thank you for your patience. So let me keep going with what I was talking about. We were saying that in this particular case, right, she says to infer second order communication, SONC would need to demonstrate that the plants that are releasing the VOX intended to inform other plants. Can you please explain to me what that would look like? Like, What do you need to know in order for the plant? The plant can't speak and can't say, hey, this is for tomato 4 rows down and over to the side, right? So given that the plant can't do this, what would you need to what would you need to see? Please don't tell me it's not happening unless you can prove to me that you know what it would look like, and therefore you're saying plants are doing it. I don't understand this. There also seems to be, I can understand them saying, we don't understand and we don't know if plants are being intentional because we have no cues that allow us to understand that. That seems much more realistic and honest. There also seems to be a wide divergence in the use of the same terms in zoology and botany. For example, in volatile organic compounds are considered both as cues released spontaneously by the sender and as signals released because of stress to, well, not just stress, there's other reasons. The same terms are defined very differently when applied to humans and other animals, because plants aren't animals. The first crucial difference is that the definition of both cues and signals depend only on the receiver's, not the sender's behavior. In animal communication, cues convey incidental information to the receiver. I yell out in pain. That's a cue, but I didn't intend it to be for anybody. I just yelped out because it was automatic to me. Whereas signals were shaped by evolution for the sole purpose of conveying information to the receiver, which is what the paper that we talked about relating to a novel approach, a different approach, is talking about, which is the consideration that, hey, of course, plants use and have developed with their pollinator partners very specific cues that have been used to shape it. So she's using just stress cues, but there's a lot of other cues that plants have developed. And given the fact that they've developed it with other species, there is an intentionality happening there. I don't know why she's not looking at it. The second crucial difference between plant and animal definitions of cues versus signals is that the difference is not just a matter of information transmission. Signals are produced by the sender with the intention to influence or modify receiver's behavior. A third crucial difference is that in animal communication, signals have an influence on both the sender's and the receiver's fitness. Hence, not only is the distinction between cues and signals in zoology more nuanced, but both terms differ from their counterparts in botany. Questions thus remain about plant communication. Do plants show any of the evidence of intentionality mentioned above or equivalent evidence for plants? For example, do plants release more volatile organic compounds if other plants are in close proximity? I.e., do they show audience effects? Does VOC production change if there is wind in the direction opposite to the intended receiver plants, i.e. sensitivity to social partner ability to receive the signal? Even to infer first-order intentionality, SONC would need evidence that plants have control over the production of VOCs and are releasing them with a communicative goal. According to a more general definition of communication in animals, signals must be learned, adaptive, and flexible. Plants lack associative learning. Really? Have we not had this conversation already? Why are we still arguing this? VOC release does not seem to be an adaptive mechanism. Have you not seen how pollinators and plants work? Why are you using only a stress response instead of all the other kinds of response? And it is not flexible, i.e. plants cannot voluntarily emit or omit release under stress. How do you know? I don't understand how they know this. They don't say this. They just give a general conversation and they just say, plants don't do this. Well, tell me how you know that plants don't do this. What measurements are you using? And are those measurements fit for plants? Hence, the evidence presented in the target article does not fulfill any of the criteria necessary for inferring what plants are doing in communication. Volatile organic chemicals do not act as signals, and plants seem to have zero-order intentionality. 3, are cue reading or other cognitive abilities indicators of sentience in plants? SONC argue for an evolutionary view of sentience to infer that plants are sentient. They describe several cognitive abilities in putative support of sentience. However, simply equating sentience with stimulus response mechanisms or even higher order cognitive abilities is insufficient. Cognitive abilities are neither necessary nor sufficient to demonstrate sentience. What is also needed cognitive abilities are neither necessary nor sufficient to demonstrate sentience. How can it not be necessary and sufficient? Okay, now I'm confused. What is also needed is, if they're not sufficient, then wouldn't that imply that they are necessary? What is also needed is evidence of something like proto-sentient behavior or proto-structures underlying the course of evolution of sentience across species. Precursors of sentience in plants could be physiological, like ocelli in planarian flatworms. I thought plants had ocelli. That evolved across organisms into eyes. Ocelli are not eyes structurally or functionally. They are predecessors of eyes. And I thought in some ways the photoreceptors of plants act that way. Maybe I'm wrong there. Or the precursor of sentience could be cognitive. For example, something similar to optimistic cognitive biases. Plants and animals belong to different kingdoms. Well, they finally said something that makes sense. The sensory mechanisms in plants are not necessarily present in animals because plants did not evolve into animals. Ding, 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 ding. Yes, true. Instead, a common ancestor, a unicellular organism, split into animals and plants 1.6 billion years ago. Thus, in order to claim that plants and animals have a similar mechanism underlying sentience, which nobody claims, by the way, which is already very unlikely because of their divergent adaptations, SONC would need to demonstrate either that, one, the common ancestor or extant similar organism have a proto-sentience mechanism, or at the very least, protostructures for sensory mechanisms that could evolve into both animal and sentience. In other words, if we are going to believe that the precursor for sentience was already existing, either when they split, in other words, the last common ancestor has to have that mechanism that eventually became sentience in both animal as well as plants, or that plants have a mechanism homologous to animal sentience, such as mitochondria. In other words, they're still using the idea that you have to show that you have something to similar have. Just, sorry, it's just crazy. In a unicellular organism, not even the most basic phenomenon of cell-to-cell communication exists. And what came next for plants and animals evolved independently in widely differing environments. Exactly. So why couldn't have plants developed a completely different mechanism that we have no way of understanding? It's kind of like this thing that we keep looking on other planets for water or for an atmosphere that we can breathe in order to believe that there is some kind of life. But what if there are beings on that planet that are alive and sentient and have nothing to do with water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, completely different evolutions of life? Why is that so hard for people? Conclusion: it remains highly unlikely that both taxa evolved sentient. Oh, I told you, remember I told you at the very beginning, I said, if we have somebody who is in the world of animal cognition, it will be very difficult for them to see for them to see plants as having cognition, and I was right. Okay, so I've passed through our first paper, and it's a thumbs up, thumbs down on plant sentience, and I am okay with that because I don't believe them. This is the paper, though, that we're going into that I have been wanting to read. I am super excited about this one. This is a completely different approach. So I am extremely excited that this approach is coming into being, because this is neither an animal sentience person or, well, actually, let's find out. Let me just share the screen. Hold on a second. Share. I am so excited to be sharing this with you because this is the one I have been waiting for. So this crazier hypothesis, panpsychism. How many of you know what panpsychism is? If you know what panpsychism is, write it in the chat, because I I am so excited that somebody talked about something completely different. Just the same as we had the paper that looked at pollinator plant behavior to understand signal cues responses, which would have negated everything. If that person the paper we just looked at around animal communication would have looked at that other paper, she would have seen, or they would have seen, because it's two women, that they were completely off the mark, that plants have developed signals and cues with pollinators, maybe not across volatile organic compounds the way they're thinking about them, although I would still debate that. But anyway, so let's get into panpsychism. So as always, we're going to start with who are the people. This is Jose Burgos, full professor at the Center for Studies and Investigations in Behavior at the University of Guadalajara. If this person tells me that plants are not sentient, I am going to be so disappointed. I'm just telling you that is my cognitive bias. I am sharing with you my cognitive bias. His scientific research focuses on neural network modeling of conditioning and testing with animals. So we're now risking that this is going to be another animal person. He also works on the philosophy of mind and the philosophy of science applied to psychology. Risky, folks, risky, but it's panpsychism, so I'm kind of excited. Giselle M. Castañeda, Giselle. I've always heard Giselle, but not Giselle. Anyway, PhD student, behavioral science program, and her research focuses on neural networks modeling, same, comparative psychology, and Pavlovian conditioning in plants. Listen to that. Pavlovian conditioning in plants. That is exciting, folks. This is exciting. This is somebody who has taken the work of Monica Galliano and taken it farther. I am so curious as to where she's going to get to. Okay, let's read this abstract. Segundo-Ortin and Calvo invite readers to consider seriously the hypothesis that plants have phenomenal consciousness or sentience. Their case is based on behavioral evidence to support their hypothesis. While the hypothesis seems crazy to many, there is a crazier hypothesis: panpsychism, according to which everything is sentient. We discuss panpsychism to raise a number of philosophical questions about SONC's hypothesis. In their target article, Segundo-Ortin and Calvo, to consider seriously the possibility that plants, like animals, human and non-human, are sentient. SONC review considerable behavioral they consider indicative of sentience in plants and other organisms inferred to be sentient. The behaviors include communication, decision-making, and learning. This evidence is fascinating and certainly adds to our understanding of plants. Exactly what it means regarding sentience, however, raises conceptual and logical questions. Are all these behaviors equally significant as indicators of sentience? If not, which are more significant and why? Whatever SNC may answer, many readers are likely to regard the idea of plant sentience as crazy. Most of the researchers have. This has been where we are. Crazy. It certainly sounds crazier than the hypothesis of fish sentience, but perhaps the conjecture is worth pursuing. SONC are very cautious, which we appreciate. I told you, Paco Calvo in particular, and I'm sure Segundo-Ortin from the papers we've read, are super cautious because they want to go methodical step by methodical step. They don't want anybody to call them out. I think they're too cautious. I think at some point you got to rip the Band-Aid off and you just got to say, look, here it is. But I'm a little bit more anarchical than they are. And I don't have to worry about funding. There does, however, still exists a still crazier hypothesis, panpsychism, which according to which everything is sentient, not just animals and plants, but also viruses, bacteria, single cells, even inorganic objects like tables, chairs, hats, rocks, computers, and doorknobs. Although I would say that there are some human beings that are equivalent to doorknobs. Sorry. Excuse me. Pretend I didn't say that. Delete, delete, delete. Subatomic particles, like electrons, are sentient too. SONC notes that there is no principled reason to deny that radically different neural structures could give rise to felt states. I am going to read that again because I think we have forgotten that. There is no principal reason to deny that radically different neural structures could give rise to felt states. For some reason, many of the researchers that we have read have forgotten that sentence, or at least choose not to deal with it directly. They just say, not the same structures, therefore not sentient. There is likewise no principled reason to deny that radically different entities, such as electrons, could be sentient too, although there reason to accept it either. The panpsychism hypothesis is worth pursuing if made sufficiently intelligible. Gall may be the most intelligible formulation thus far with what he calls constitutive panpsychism, raising the issue of mental causation. According to Goff, electron sentience is vastly simpler than plant sentience. I wonder if that would be the equivalent from a Darwinian perspective of matone maso base materia, which translates to the base matter brick. Or is it the brick base matter? I can't remember how exactly we translated it, but simpler sentient entities combine to form more complex sentient entities. So if your bacteria and all of your cellular level is sentient, then therefore you're sentient. And that goes for everything, according to panpsychism. There's a great, I think it's a Stanford Dictionary of Consciousness, which is fantastic and has a really good description of panpsychism in it that is pretty easy to understand. What would be SONC's stance on Goff's panpsychism? Do SONC assume that sentience causes certain behaviors? If yes, how does this work? Goff suggests that science is not solely or even mainly about evidence, but also and equally important about intelligibility, conceptual clarity and precision, parsimony, unifying, explanatory power. I like this definition. I need to go, hold on. I need to write the name Goff down when it comes to consciousness, because now I have somebody else I want to study. Goff, consciousness. Okay. SONC's hypothesis seems more strongly evidence-based than anything else because, again, methodical. SONC would be likely to ask whether electrons display the behaviors they take as indicators of sentience. There is as yet no evidence for an affirmative answer, although there is some evidence of Pavlovian conditioning, which is one indicator of sentience for SONC in certain inorganic systems. Does a negative answer mean that electrons are insentient? No. SONC appeal to reasoning by analogy, inferring unobservable similarities between inner processes from observable behavior similarities. But the observable-unobservable distinction is too unintelligible to be useful. I agree with this. This is part of the basis of what I keep arguing about. On this form of inference, sentience could be considered as the most understandable explanation of certain behaviors. A third solution might be to view other minds as theoretical entities, as anticipated by Premack and Woodruff's highly influential paper. All these alternatives, of course, suffer from important difficulties, so we cannot reject SONC's appeal to analogy, but it's worth keeping options open. Yes, and absolutely yes. I am with you. I am with you. It's funny because I first started thinking about sentience or entanglement around fish. I was working at the time, I was having discussions with a researcher in the University of Bologna who was looking at fish entanglement as an understanding mechanism internal to plant sentience. It was fascinating. It was fascinating discussions. I kind of should touch base with him again because that might be really interesting. Oh, I'm going to definitely read some of these papers because I want to understand where these folks and look into this study. Okay, so we have a one down, no sentience, panpsychism conversation that says, hey, maybe we're looking at this all wrong. If we were to, instead of trying to use evidence-based observable behavior as the requisite for sentience in plants, if we went down the path of panpsychism and alternative forms of sentience, wouldn't then we get to sentience from a different avenue? I am good with that. That is our second one. So moving on, we will move into, and this one is plant sentience. Hold on. Not now, maybe later. I wonder what they're trying to say here. Not now, maybe later. Let's see what we. Plant sentience, not now, it's Helen Tiffin from the University of Wollongong in Australia. So let's find out who this professor is. This is an adjunct professor, the University of Wollongong in Australia, a fellow. She has degrees in both biological science and arts and held a Canadian government senior research professor at Queen's University. Her most recent articles are, Do Insects Feel Pain? Ooh, I have, hold on a second, on that front. Oh no, I closed it. I had a New York Times article. So there is a New York Times article about this. Do insects feel pain? And I had it open, but it's behind a paywall. And I got to be honest, I don't read the New York Times enough to merit paying for these articles. Although I do believe in paying for articles. I don't have a problem with that. I just have to figure out a mechanism where it is not $20 to read one paper one time or one article. Anyway, I'm going to go look it up again. But Do Insects Feel Pain? If anybody has access to the New York Times, please let me know what that article is like, because it looked fascinating and super interesting as an article. So human overpopulation, the elephant in the greenhouse, interesting. So hard to tell where she's going to be based on her work, although Do Insects Feel Pain? So I don't know. Let's see. We have one down, and one, we're looking at it wrong, which is cool because now we've had in this series 2 articles that are very interesting because they're basically saying, hey, you're looking at this all wrong. Like, stop it. You're looking at this all wrong. Okay, folks, hold on a second. Before I start in here, I'm going to try. We're starting to get a little bit darker. We are going to attempt to introduce light. Let's do that light for now. Okay, we're going to try this. I know it almost doesn't look like I have any light on, but okay. Ooh, no. Sorry about that. Okay. Plant sentience, abstract. SONC's target article provides compelling evidence for physiological and behavioral complexity in plants. Compelling evidence already makes me happy, bringing us closer to a recognition of some kind of plant cognition. But it does not, as yet, offer firm grounds for inferring sentience, feeling in plants. Okay. The recent history of the scientific demonstration and recognition of animal sentience in invertebrates, hence her insect part, for example, does not entirely rule out the possibility that might provide the problems raised, not insurmountable. Talking about the elephant in the greenhouse. That is not threaten the now proven case for animal sentience. She says they're not insurmountable. I still think that that's the elephant in the greenhouse. I still think that we cannot have a true conversation on plant sentience until we have the conversation of, let's for a second assume that we do discover plant sentience. How do you all not freak out and realizing that we have been willy-nilly killing a whole series of sentient beings? Willy-nilly. Because at least in my opinion, at least in the context of where I live and the way that I live my life, we're not willy-nilly killing animals, but we do willy-nilly kill plants. Okay. Well, we willy-nilly kill ants and other. Okay. Anyways. Oh my goodness. The next 100 years of human development is going to be really interesting as our science catches up or as our minds finally open to the idea of sentience. We're going to have a lot of atoning to do. Whew. Introduction. Over the last 30 years, there has been increasing public scientific interest in the complexities of behavior and plant physiology. The target article of Segundo-Ortin Calvo offers a valuable summary of much of this research to date, particularly on the possibility of plant sentience. SONC's claims are based on behavioral complexity, apparent cognitive capacity, and electromagnetic activity, albeit involving pathways different from those of animal models, as it should, because they're not the same. S&C admit that their evidence for plant sentience, with sentience broadly defined as a state that it feels like something to be in, fair, requires further investigation. Yay for further investigation. They hope their work will serve as an invitation to investigate sentient in plants with the same rigor as in non-human animals. Unfortunately, there are way too many people that have just shut that down, but that's the goal. Henning and Mittelbach offer some support, but no commentary has so far agreed fully with S&C's hypothesis of plant sentience. True. Footnote 1. It is worth noting, however, that, with few exceptions, the basis on which some commentators address the target article seem rather anthropo-zoocentric and occasionally anthropo-zoomorphic. Well, yes, I would agree with that statement. I would agree with that statement very much. Almost all peer commentaries to date reject it on a number of grounds, finding the case for plant sentience at this point unproven. Possible consequences. Oh, this is going to be interesting. This is somebody who wrote an article about the elephant in the greenhouse. So this is going to be interesting. Possible consequences of accepting their hypothesis. At least 3 of the 27 commentaries consider what effect acceptance of the target's article hypothesis might entail. According to Gutfrund, SONC's case for sentience in plants shows that the scientific method is incapable of proving sentience in either plants or animals. Contrary to what is thought to have already been firmly established, i.e., that most major animal groups, all in the way down to invertebrates, are sentient, Gutfrund contends that sentience is a matter of culture, not science. I could get behind that. Brooks Pribach, unlike Gutfrund, accepts sentience in animals as proven, but rejects SONC's evidence in plants. Not because its acceptance would call into question the ability of science to demonstrate not human sentience altogether, but because those scientists who still reject sentience in some animal groups could use the acceptance of plant sentience to trivialize sentience in animals. I love this person for calling out the elephant in the room. Brooks Pribach agrees that plants are crucial for human and non-human animal survival, and that the behavioral and physiological complexities of plants reported by SONC could foster a much-needed de-instrumentalization of plants. But she fears that concluding that plants feel on the basis of the sparse evidence so far would pose a threat to the little that has so far been accomplished to protect the proven sentience of animals. Remember, I said this at the very beginning. I have said that in the stream today, and I see it in every stream. Animal communicators and animal sentience proponents are not necessarily in favor of plant sentience because they fear that by claiming that plants are sentient, it would somehow destabilize the work that they have done to prove that the animals are sentient. It's almost as if they are fearful that something will happen and that we will, I don't know, maybe if everything is sentient, sentience no longer matters. It's a good question as to what happens. Milbourne considers what could be the ethical implications of accepting the evidence of plant sentience, the big elephant in the room, or the elephant in the greenhouse, as I keep calling it. Well, she called it in the greenhouse. I'm just saying I keep calling it out. Given the problem that all living creatures, including humans, ultimately depend on plants for food, I keep saying it doesn't mean we can't eat plants into acknowledging that they're sentient. Can have different bodily structures. It's a whole different ballgame. Plus, all animals feed on plants as well as other animals. It is called the cycle of life. No, I am not going to sing The Lion King. Don't tempt me. Ethical veganism rejects animal exploitation and consumption on the grounds of proven animal sentience. But what would be the results where animal consumption is a dietary necessity if plants were also proven to feel? I told you, this is the real elephant in the greenhouse. What would happen to all the vegans who are vegans because they do not believe in killing anything alive? Would you all become fruitarians? And could one argue that an apple that falls off the tree is still alive? I agree with Milborn's conclusion that in such a case, the least harm principle would apply. Plants, if proven to feel, are unlikely to experience pain or pleasure, which is still, although so debatable. There are many that would say that plants already do feel pain. Anyway, and we read the least harm paper. I don't think that that's the right strategy either, but it's a step forward. I'm okay with it. It's a step forward. Okay. Plants are undoubtedly sensitive, behaviorally responsive to their surroundings, and have been actively involved in forming complex relationships with other species. But in scientific terms, these capacities are not evidence of course not, because it would trigger everything else you just talked about. Science, history, and time. 40 years ago, it was thought insects were sentient. Yet continuing research in that field has tended firmly in the direction of recognizing insect sentience. Don't just kill ants because you don't like them, or spiders either. With increasing numbers of researchers concurring, given that animal sentience has now been established in so many animal groups, and it should be established in all, including invertebrates, it would be irrational to deny. Thank you. It would be irrational to deny the possibility that future work for which SONC call could someday prove that plants feel too. Thank you. I do not understand. Researchers that just flat out say plants are not sentient. They will never be sentient. And it's stupid for us to continue to do this research. I do not understand. It seems very unscientific to me. At the present time, however, SONC's evidence for plant cognition seems more robust than their evidence for plant sentience. Specific support for claims of sentience in plants is minimal, using animal definitions. But we need to use plant definitions. Anyway, Plebe notes that while we may accept zoomorphic comparisons, we are biased against serious consideration of plant sentience because of our inherent anthropomorphism, our anthropocentrism. Yes. He points in particular to the concept of time, noting how differently humans and plants exist and move in time, which rules out the kinds of analogical experimental comparisons used to demonstrate animal sentience. Yes, that was a good paper. That was an interesting paper. Kuhn argued that normal science proceeds much the way it does in the issue of animal sentience, hypothesis followed by rigorous peer scrutiny of its claims. But at certain times, Kuhn notes, crisis in understanding can catalyze scientific revolutions. Science is a major aspect of our culture, not its antithesis, as Gutfreund seems to suggest. So perhaps our era of climate change and apocalyptic animal and plant species losses is such a revolutionary time. Confronted with anomaly with crisis, scientists take a different attitude towards existing paradigms, and the nature of their research changes accordingly. Possible. It is important that researchers of the caliber of SONC continue their already productive line of inquiry. Even if a compelling case for plant sentience remains elusive, any research that can enhance our understanding of biological complexity beyond our destructive anthropocentric solipsism is extremely desirable. I am in agree with that. I am completely in agree with it. In conclusion, although SONC make a good case for physiological and behavioral complexity in plants, thereby proving a potential platform for further investigation of plant cognition, sentience, feeling, in plants has not been effectively demonstrated using an anthropocentric model. I added that part because, come on, she basically says it. Rejected by most of the peer commentators on the grounds of unconvincing zoomorphic analogies, hence, she did just say it, I should have just read further, dependence on possibly arguments rather than the empirical evidence, etc., the target article nevertheless offers opportunities for exploring different pathways to understanding biological being. The history of science, the dominant Western epistemology of the last 4 centuries, tells us that incremental changes in the acceptance of hypotheses as well as major paradigm shifts do occur. Yes, yes. This is exactly the type of open-minded scientific experimentation and exploration that I want to see. Thank you, Professor Tiffin. Thank you so much. I do think that this is an important way of looking at it. She did not give them full credit. She didn't say, hey, yes, this works. She said, interesting. You talk about some stuff that seems to make sense, but maybe there are some other things that are missing. And so we could look at it in a completely different way. I think that that's very useful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We need more of that. This is exactly what we need. I am biased. I have always said it. I have a bias relating to plant sentience. My communication with plants tell me that they are sentient. Also tells me that kin are not humans. And so kin are not animals. They are in a completely different way of being, in a different way of expressing kin self. So I am not selves. I am not looking for that kind of behavior. And I also admit my own biases in like where I draw the line. But I think it's important for the research to be open to the exploration. And I love that this paper has said that. Okay, so let's look at the next one. We have 2 more, this one and 1 more to go. And then we have the revisitation from Segundo-Ortin and Calvo themselves. Now, this one is called, hold on, let me share. Let me get it there. This one is called Multiple Ways to Implement and Infer Sentience. Interesting. So here we have, let's go read who we're talking about. This is Nicolas Rouleau, Assistant Professor of Health Sciences at Wilfrid Laurier University. I don't even know where that is. So this is a neuroscientist who uses embodied and bioengineered tissues to model neural diseases. Oof. And build minimally cognitive systems. When you're talking about neurobiology and build systems, I always get a little nervous, but that's okay. Michael Levin is a distinguished professor of biology. And so this person is at Tufts. So this is in the United States. And they do research at the intersection of developmental biology, computer science, and behavior. So these are modeling people. These are people that seems to be modeling of behavior, of biology and understanding biology by being able to model it. This is going to be interesting. Why do I have a feeling this is going to go multiple ways to infer sentience? Let's see where these are going to take us. One of them is in Canada. Wilfrid Laurier is in Ontario, and the other ones are in Massachusetts, Tufts, and Harvard. Okay. Let's see where this one's going. I don't know where this one's going to take us. SONC's thorough review of plant neurobiology presents evidence supporting the possibility of plant sentience. I am already happy that you just say possibility of. They make compelling case that plants assess risk, cooperate, mimic, and pursue goals. There's a double standard. Behavioral patterns associated with subjective experiences in humans are considered valid for inferring cognition in non-human animals, but not in diverse other systems, including plants, right? If bacteria or plants or viruses act the way that humans act, we do not state, they do not accept that means sentience. I understand that. We argue that cognitive functions, including sentience, can potentially be achieved by very different systems and their disparate substrates. We offer some context from basal cognition literature and suggest that the deep insights of neurobiology have relevance far beyond neurons. This is exciting. Okay, basal cognition, or I don't even know how other people pronounce it, is all about what is called minimal cognition. In other words, what is the minimum amount of state that is I am cognitive. I don't have advanced cognition to be able to sit there and say, I think, therefore I am. At least this isn't the way it's interpreted, but I do think in some way, shape, or form. So that is what basal cognition means in this case. So neurobiologists have been arguing in this particular series, and as well as in general, you'll see it all across my plant consciousness commentary, which again, you can see the entire playlist on YouTube, as well as in the Naturally Conscious community and on my website. You will find all of the previous videos. And so I talk often about how neurobiology human animal neurobiology stops at the fact that the neural structures, that plants don't have neural structures. Therefore, cognition doesn't exist, because for many of these, you have to have a nervous system and a brain in order to be cognitive. Now, there is an argument that by people like Balushka and Mancuso, that plants have neuron-like structures. So that's one side of the argument. Plants have neural-like structures, therefore follow the neural-like structures and you end up in cognition and in sentience eventually. There's the other side that says, hey, plants have completely different structures, but they are analogous in the way that they do things, not how they do it, but in what they are doing. And therefore, since they are analogous in what they are doing, that is consciousness. So that's another avenue that's being taken. Then there is another avenue that is going down the process that says, folks, stop looking at all of this shit. Who cares about neurobiology in, vertebrates and invertebrates? We are talking about plants. Let's go off and discover what does cognition and sentience mean in plants. These people also have no doubt that plants possess it. It's just a matter of looking at what are the structures that create it. It's a very different way of looking at it. So let's see where we're going with this. Whether in plants or animals, cognitive functions such as sentience are always inferred. Segundo-Ortin Calvo dispel the twin myths that A, plants are merely reflexive organisms, and that B, sentience or felt states, in other words, I feel, therefore I am, i.e. the capacity to experience as a subject. In other words, I am cognizant, I am aware that I am experiencing something. So it's not just I feel a pinprick and so I feel it, which is one form of felt state. But if felt states means I feel a pinprick and I know that I am feeling a pinprick. That's the difference. Are only accessible to or likely to be experienced by animals. Regarding A, SO and C report mounting empirical counter evidence. Regarding B, they make the case that current objections to the possibility of plant sentience are based on intuition and unsupported reasoning. They point out that cognitive scientists have become increasingly willing to attribute sentience to members of the animal kingdom, despite our long-standing inability to measure subjective experience directly in any species, including humans. Indeed, all attributions of cognition, including sentience, are always inferred on the basis of embodied behaviors. In other words, including verbal self-report in humans. And this is the most difficult part, is that plants do not respond in the time frames and in the behaviors that we expect. It's not like you prick a plant and all of a sudden the plant pulls back. Sure, there are the mimosa, Pertica and Dionea, the Venus flytrap, that do some kinds of behaviors. But for the majority of plants, it's a whole different thing. That doesn't mean that they're not experiencing or aware that they're experiencing that prick. We just don't know. We don't know what is the behavior that's happening. What is the expression that a plant experiences in order to be able to say, yes, I know I am being pinched. If felt states in humans and other animals are always inferred, why is the same leap from observable behavior to inferred sentience not afforded to other organisms, including plants? I already like your thinking. Rouleau and Levin, thank you. I have been asking the same myself. SNC's approach to the question of plant sentience by demonstrating that their behaviors are fundamentally cognitive because they are goal-directed, anticipatory, flexible, and adaptive. These qualities are fundamentally unlike simple reflexes, which are comparatively rigid, typically inborn, and do not require any accompanying mental action. As SONC point out, plants can integrate chemical and electrical, optical, and mechanical signals to discriminate kin from non-kin, and they can compete and cooperate with neighboring organisms. These infractions are predicted by hierarchical rule sets that change according to physiological needs. Isn't that enough to show sentience? Plants also display context-dependent habituation responses. Learn to avoid otherwise neutral stimuli by paired association, which is classical conditioning. So in other words, they learn how to see something and pair it to some kind of state or action. Reorient themselves in anticipation of reinforcements. So this is the sunflower reorienting themselves at night, or with information from one season to another, changing the way and anticipating what is going to happen in the coming season based on what has happened in the past, learning from the past, integrating it, and then anticipating it in the future. Come on, tell me that that's not complex behavior. And evaluate risks to inform game theoretic decision making. The other day, I was listening to a podcast and I was so disappointed to hear the person who I was listening to, who will remain nameless for right now, because I really want to reach out to these folks. But they have a really cool podcast that I love the way that they talk about plants from the perspective of they're mainly talking about trees. But what I hate is that one of them, who is the arborist, is like categorically against the idea of plant intelligence. And the other one, who is his friend who has just learned from him, is also now categorically against plant intelligence because he's learned it from this one. And it's like, and their data is wrong. He was citing the other day that plants do not do certain things with their roots. In other words, plants don't hunt out water and other, when it's been proven. And there are multiple studies that show that plants do exactly the opposite of what they were saying. In other words, plants do the one thing that they were saying plants don't do. So I need to just gather up a whole series of studies and send it to them and be like, hey, can we have a conversation about this? Because you guys are fairly well listened to. And I am okay with you not saying plants are totally sentient and alive. I'm okay because that's your choice and you can do whatever it is you want. But please don't send out erroneous information. You can dispute your interpretation of the data, but please don't state that the data doesn't exist, because the data does exist for what it is that you're talking about. I hear this all the time when it talks to plants, to plant literature or to podcasts and stuff that talk about plants. People who are in very narrow fields, especially if your field is much more, in relation to plant identification and other aspects, you might not be aware of all of this other research. And I just feel the need to send them a list of studies and be like, hey, here, go read these. Then you could totally have a conversation saying, I've read the studies and I don't believe them, or I think that they're incorrect, or that they weren't carried out right. I'm okay with that. That's a choice. But at least, at least acknowledge the fact that there is research out there. Okay, sorry. My little rant, me and my wait, where am I? Sorry, wrong place. Here. Most impressively, plants engage in mimicry to avoid predation and can even exploit the perceptual biases of animals within a single life cycle. Although none of these behaviors, or any behaviors, necessarily require sentience, they are often proposed as evidence of animal sentience because of their subjective correlates in humans. This is an important listen up. Let's follow this train of thought. This train of thought. When humans are observed, cooperate, or compete with each other, imitate the actions of others, outwit predators, and reorient their bodies in anticipation of rewards or punishments, cognitive scientists are willing to consider the possibilities of an accompanying subjective experience. This is consistent with the common intuition that other people are minded. They have a theory of mind, which is often extended to non-human animals without significant controversy. As SONC suggests, the same willingness to experience by analogy must be afforded to plants. Every time one of the scientists gets closer to showing analogies between humans and plants, mind you, I'm not even a huge fan of the idea of using human characteristics in order to understand plant sentience, but when they do, inevitably, there is a certain set of scientists who shall remain nameless, although they have submitted papers, who move the goalpost. They will tell you why this thing that plants do that is similar to humans is not similar enough. Oh my goodness, it drives me nuts. It drives me absolutely nuts. That animal sentience is inferred on the basis of some likeliness to humans is ultimately an intuition. To be consistent, in the absence of uniquely tuned properties afforded to a narrow kind of cellular substrate, which is what I think you should do, have something that is attuned to the plant body, the same charitable interpretation must be extended to all systems that display observable response patterns that are consistent with animal cognition, including artificial intelligences. Now we get into the slippery slope, and now we understand why these folks are saying it. Metaplastic materials and robotic systems. So they're saying, this isn't a conversation about plants. If we have behaviors observed in even artificial systems or plants, analogous, similar to what humans do, we need to accept them. If behavior is the window to sentience, evaluation criteria must focus on observable response patterns without reference to the means by which they are produced. There's only one thing. If a robot is created in the image of a man, therefore, is it the robot that is making decisions, or is the robot just a proxy and extension of the human making the decisions? Prove me one way or another. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on that. They want to make their toys intelligent. Thank you, Michelle. I like that. They want to make their toys intelligent. And so they're going to use plants to piggyback on it in order to make their toys intelligent. Indeed, a system-agnostic approach offers the best roadmap for a deep empirically fruitful unification of frameworks across cybernetics, behavioral science, bioengineering, robotics, material science, and biomedicine. Notice he does not say botany, plant physiology, just wants to make their toys intelligent. I like that. Other cognitive functions can be implemented by very different substrates. Why not sentience? If, as SONC suggests, plants are potentially sentient, how do they achieve felt states without nervous tissue and a brain-like centralized processor? Because they're plants and they have a whole different physiology. SONC point out that, like animals, plants synthesize and signal with several common neurotransmitters, including the amino acid glutamate, the most abundant excitatory neurotransmitter in the human central nervous system. Plants also display action potential like depolarizations, which propagate along distributed vascular networks of aqueous conducts. We've already talked about this. Action potentials are the electrical response systems, synapses-like, using very like words, that are the quick chemical response. Action potentials are, that is what fires off and then moves a signal across a aqueous conduct, a conduit that allows for, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm missing a word. Conductivity, I guess, is the best way of saying it. Whereas plants and animals share a surprising degree of overlapping electrochemical physiology, their anatomical organizations are quite different. Relevant here are the concepts of multiple realizability and substrate independence. Multiple realizability refers to the idea that the same function can be implemented by very different systems. Similarly, a function is said to be substrate independent when it can be achieved without the contingency of a particular material or physical medium. Computation, for example, can be implemented in many ways by machines and living organisms alike. It is quite possible that felt states can be achieved in multiple ways and by many different biological substrates. A hypothesis that is already seriously considered when discussing the possibility of sentience in animals that are sufficiently different from humans, like, I don't know, say a fish, or probably more like an insect, or maybe some kind of amoeba-like thing. But that's not an animal. Probably a cephalopod? Cetaceous? I don't know. It is already a mainstream assumption that cognitive functions, including memory, attention, and perception, are similarly realized by disparate brain structures across species. Despite differences in cortical lamination, mini-column dimensions, cell density, and gyrification, it is generally assumed that sentience is, at minimum, possible in non-human animals. Yes, but some people don't even think it's possible in plants. That's the frustration. Many neuroscientists subscribe to the concept of biological degeneracy, identifying structurally dissimilar regions within brains that can achieve the same functional outcome. For example, blind sight responses mediated by subcortical and brainstem nuclei with independent duplicate maps of retinal inputs. Did you understand that sentence? If you did, explain it to me. If different organizations of nervous tissue can achieve the same functions, the possibility that cognitive capacities, including sentience, can be achieved by other tissues should be considered. And I will agree with this, even if it is going to take them to their toys are intelligent. But it's a good argument anyway. It is highly implausible that all sentient life in the universe achieves felt states using the neural circuitry underlying human consciousness on Earth. Thank you. I have been saying that. It is very unlikely, especially when you think about non-earthbound species. Why are we looking for similar mechanisms to what we here call life in order to recognize life on other planets? It just seems absurd. Plant sentience is, we've been watching way too much Star Trek and Star Wars. Seriously, it is degenerating our ability to actually understand like true space exploration, I think. Plant sentience is likely to be the tip of the iceberg of sentient systems yet unknown. So this is probably the slippery slope some of them were trying to avoid, which is that, hey, we should recognize that plants could be sentient, because if we recognize that, then we can recognize that our robots are sentient, that our artificial intelligence are sentient, that our LLMs are, everything is sentient. Which then, doesn't that just take us back to the panpsychism argument? Interesting. Okay, we have reached our last paper in this series. Well, not last in the sense of last of the replies. And then we have, the final reply or revisitation by Segundo-Ortin and Calvo. So this is exciting. We're getting close. Hold on a second. I want to check something. I have it up. Okay. I'm looking at, because now it's getting dark out, right? We already had this conversation. I could turn this light on. Hold on a second. So, but see how it gets all pixely behind me? I don't understand why. It should be, with the amount of light that I have in here, it should be nice and sharp, just the same as it was before. Does that make it worse or better? Can't tell yet. I am still working on how. I have my low light compensation on. Michelle's like, don't go on a SpaceX flight because they tend to blow up. We're not even going to talk there. We're not going to go there. We're going to go there. Okay, so hold on. Let me try to see what happens if I turn on. I don't know. I think that was worse. Okay. All right, folks. We have one more of these like short papers, and then we have the revisitation. I am excited. I don't know about you, but I am excited. We are reaching the end of our journey. So this is Assessing Evidence for Valence. Victor Carranza Pinedo from the Philosophy Department of the University of Munster. So who is this person? He's a postdoctoral researcher, and he's a member of the collaborative research, a novel synthesis of individualization across behavior, ecology, and evolution. Do you think this is going to be a for or against? So far, this one has been the most balanced of our entire sessions. We have those that are opening the path either through, let's look at plants as like everything is sentient and conscious, panpsychism. Let's look at plants as in plants have their own structures and therefore we should look at it. Let's look at plants because, well, if we can look at analogous systems, we should accept that those analogous systems are also sentient. So we have three different paths, but we are all getting to the idea of it is absolutely possible that plants could be sentient. We're not discounting it, which has happened quite a bit in previous papers. So the abstract is, I make some remarks about whether evidence of valence responses constitutes evidence of valenced states. We've already talked about what valenced states is. They're states that are valid for the research that we're trying to do, and therefore of sentience in organisms. So compelling evidence that plants are capable of complex cognitive capacities and argue that this increases the possibility that plants are also capable of sentience. I will focus on a point briefly touched on by SO&C, but closely related to their main argument. What constitutes evidence for valence states in an organism? In the concluding passage, SO&C claimed that the list of cognitive abilities that increase the probability that plants are sentient includes not only decision-making, learning, and memory, but also valence. In this context, valence is understood as the organism's capacity to assign a value, advantage. So this is advantageous, this is something that's harmful, this is something that's good, this is something that's bad, all of these types of things, to a particular stimulus or the summary of information about its surroundings relative to its own current state. So I assume I give a value to what is happening to me. And this is a big part connected to, again, sentience, because not only do I know what is happening and I can react to it, I assign whether or not that is good or bad, advantageous or not advantageous. This is decision making. That's why valence is important, because those that are arguing that plants, for example, anticipate behavior based on some kind of automatic mechanism do not give any valence. It's not that the plant is saying, hey, it would probably be better for me if I pointed towards the direction where I know the sun is going to come up, because that way the earliest rays of sunlight I can get energy from. And that would probably give me some sort of advantage. And that's the reason why the plant is doing it, by analyzing and understanding a rhythm, rather than saying there is a mechanism that says if sun here, anticipate that that's where the sun is going to come from. Those are two different things. So this valence conversation is important. To understand the relevance of valence in the argument, one should keep in mind that researchers standardly distinguish a broad notion of sentience, understood as the capacity to experience mental states, also referred to as phenomenal consciousness, from a restricted notion understood as the capacity to feel valence states such as suffering or joy. The association between valence states and phenomenal consciousness remains an area of unresolved debate. But evidence of valence states in an organism is still widely considered to raise the likelihood of phenomenal consciousness, as SO&C's concluding remarks attest. As SO&C point out, there is little doubt that plants' cognitive repertoire includes the capacity to value perceive stimuli and select, this is all decision making, which is all connected to sentience, and select a course of action that appears to maximize positive outcomes and minimize negative ones, right? I don't just go for what is most probable, but I also minimize damage that could be done for me. So this is really me making a choice. Particularly relevant is the finding that decision-making processes in some plants can involve trade-offs between competing parameters, such as richness of soil versus degree of certainty, rather than mere automatic responses. That's what I was stating before. However, the question arises, does the capacity to evaluate constitute empirical evidence of the capacity to experience valence states? To understand those cases where it does, let us note that apart from decision making, there are plenty of aspects of an organism's response that may be considered balanced. Behavioral, physiological, or expressed responses can be categorized as positive or negative because they are triggered by stimuli that increase, decrease the organism's fitness. How healthy am I, for example? Something we as humans don't evaluate enough. Is me doing this going to increase my fitness? Way too many people don't do that evaluation. Lacking direct evidence for affect, researchers single out those responses that reliably occur as a consequence of affective states in the presence or absence of species-relevant environmental stimuli. At this stage, however, it would be a mistake to count such a hypothesis as evidence of valence state in an organism. To achieve that, the causal link between valence states and valenced measurable responses needs to be embedded in a theoretic framework in which it fulfills an explanatory role. He's starting to back off here. Let's look at two representative examples of such an embedding. Researchers may proceed by comparing physiological responses in humans reporting the experience of affective states with the physiological responses of non-human mammals undergoing similar experimental conditions, grounded at the idea that similar effects in phylogenetically close species arise from similar cases. In other words, I'm a human being and I can tell you what I am experiencing, and if we see a primate, for example, doing the same thing, most likely they are experiencing the same thing that the human was able to communicate through words, but the primate can't communicate through words, but the actions are so close to what the human is experiencing that most likely what's going on cognitively or mentally is the same. In the case of species more distant from us, such as invertebrates, researchers may instead proceed by measuring the influence of affective states on their judgment, grounded on extensive evidence that individuals in negative states manifest more pessimistic judgments relative to their counterparts in more positive states. So again, I modify this and I look at certain kinds of avoidance rather than other types of decision making that requires me to assume certain cognitive functions. In both examples, the prediction, namely that a particular physiological or behavioral response is triggered by valence states, is confirmed or not, or if necessary, refined, according to an independently motivated set of assumptions. These may relate to the physiological substrate behind the realization of affective states in phylogenetically close species. In other words, species that are similar in nature, at least, I'm all in the animal kingdom, at least. The function of affective states as proximate mechanisms guiding organisms' behavior, etc. Hence, there is no need to hypothesize valence states on the basis of just the observation of valence-like behavior, physiological or expressive responses. An explanatory framework is required. In other words, you need to be able to understand how these things all connect together. When physicists hypothesize theoretical entities, they do not do so merely on the basis of observations or effects, but on the basis of an explanatory models. For example, the Higgs boson, which was hypothesized to explain the origin of particle masses within the standard model of particle physics, or a theory. In other words, you have to have an overarching theory or a model that fits in all the different pieces, and then you have to observe those pieces. If you remember earlier today, I said to you, I am sick of some of these people just saying this doesn't exist without telling me what would be the equivalence that you need to see in order to believe that sentience exists. Because you can't keep just saying plants aren't sentient without at least developing a model for what plant sentience would look like. Because otherwise, it's a biased state. You're going to continue to not recognize it because you have no frame of reference to recognize. So this is the model or a theory needs to be there, because then in the case of Higgs boson, they were able to create the experimental model to prove or disprove what they were doing. So they were able to create the experimental state, or not state, the experiment itself, to prove whether or not their model was accurate or not. But if you don't have a theory or a model, how do you express it? And that's what I believe is one of the other big pieces that's happening in the conversation about plant intelligence. It would be difficult to argue for weakening such a requirement in the case of non-animal entities. In conclusion, we need to put ourselves, and I think this is where, I think if scientists on the down low would talk to animal communicators and ask the animal communicators, plant communicators, to communicate with the plants and ask them, hey, what's the theory? What's the model? How can we create this? Help us. And then later created the experiments to show it. I think this would be a smart move. I don't know if they're going to do it, but I volunteer. If you would like to hire me to consult and be the animal communicator working with the bean plant that you're most likely working with, I can do it. I'm happy to do it. In conclusion, the observation of complex cognitive abilities in plants, including the capacity to evaluate environmental stimuli as positive or negative, does not constitute evidence of the capacity to experience valence states, and therefore following a widespread assumption of the capacity of phenomenal consciousness. Observed aspects of an organism's response that may be constructed as valenced may, at most, raise the subjective probability of an effective sentience, not the objective one. So it sounds like what they're saying is, right now, you're missing the theory and the model. And so therefore, what you're looking at is not enough, because you need the model or the theory that brings it all together. It's possible, but it's just not there yet, which, I'm okay with that. That's a somewhat fair observation in that perspective. All right, folks. Darn. Hold on. Sorry. I just opened up a revised document, and it's 35 pages long, which means I thought I would go through this relatively quickly. Instead, darn, folks, we're going to have to do this next week. I am bummed. Unless we want to sit here for another hour, which I don't think we want to do, and neither do I, because I have been drinking tea. And if I sit here for another hour, that means I'm going to have to go, physiological things. So we still have one more session to go in order to go through the conclusion of this all. Oh, man. I wasn't ready for that. Okay, folks. So we have one last paper to go through. We're not going to be going through it today. We will be going through it next Friday. It's called Plant Sentience Revisited, Sifting Through the Thicket of Perspectives. So this is, I'm going to leave you with like a picture of Paco Calvo and Miguel Segundo-Ortin. That way you see them. These are them. These are them. Go over here. Oops. That didn't work out. So this is Paco Calvo, who is super fun, super funny, sweet, just funny person. And Miguel Segundo-Ortin, which I look forward to one time meeting him. He's also a member of the Minimal Intelligence Lab. So these two, and we still have one. So their last paper. So what they did was, let's give a little bit of an in conclusion. Today we went through where are we? How many papers did we go through? Hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5? I thought we went through 6. Yeah, we went through 6. There's one missing here. I thought we went through 6, but maybe I closed one by accident. Let me pull up the original paper so that I can just double check it. Okay, we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, we did. We went through 5. So we went through 5 papers today. We went through, I was totally convinced that we went through this paper, but I guess I'm wrong. No, we did not. Okay, 5 papers today. Sorry about that. Okay, now I'm double checking everything. I just want to make sure I get it right. So we went through Animal Communication and Sentience by Katia Correa Caeiro and Katia Liebel, which of course was we do not believe. Then everything started to get good, way more interesting. So we started to talk about panpsychism, and we talked about Plant Sentience by Helen Tiffin, which was about, she is somebody who works on insect, invertebrate sentience. We talked about multiple ways to implement and infer sentience. And basically, the end result of today's papers is the fact that the people that we look through today, are all people who are willing to say, hey, you have not proven to us necessarily plant sentience, but we acknowledge that we're still way too early, which is funny because we've been discussing this for 2,000 years. 2,000 years. 2,000 years. Anyway, but we're still too early in our scientific development to be able to actually say something with any kind of degree of certainty. So we're not there yet. We need more evidence. We need to design more things. I really do like the fact of assessing evidence for valence. I like this last paper that we went through because I feel like this last paper puts in scientific terms something that I keep saying, which is, how will you know when you find it if you have not designed models to test for it? The neurobiologists and the plant physiologists that continue to say this is not possible, besides the fact that having no imagination, are not recognizing the fact that if you were to give some space for this and design models or theories, then we can test as to whether or not plants can fill out those models or those theories. But just saying no is not good enough. It's not. It's not the right way to do this. And it doesn't gain anything for humanity. I do also like that it was called out that the idea that if we give and we recognize the sentience of plants, this will change everything. The clothing we wear, the furniture we buy, the housing materials that we do, the way we eat, everything will be affected. Does that mean that we will not be able to have beautiful wooden structures like the one behind me? No, but does it mean we will have 700,000 of these that are all going to the landfill? Gosh, I hope so. Goddess, please. I hope so. I hope we move into that direction. So there is what we're getting to is the fact that many, many different things have to change. It'll be interesting to see where we go from here. So the next session, which will be next week, it will be 1 hour later than it normally is because we have the Plant Wisdom Book Club where we're going to have our second mini discussion on Chase Mimosa, the psychology of plants, which I know not everybody loves, but I got to admit, I'm having a good time with this book. I'm really enjoying the history of understanding the discussions around plant cognition, way from the days of when mind and soul were one and were the same thing, just two sides of the same coin, to where we are today, which how the heck we separated those things, I don't understand. And I am looking forward to discussions that maybe bring them back together because I do think that they're the same, but maybe that's a little bit too much panpsychism for anything. I highly recommend that you go over to, I think it's, like I said, the Stanford Encyclopedia of, I think it's Stanford Encyclopedia of Consciousness, which is a great, sorry, I just looked over at the chat and there's a chat that I don't know from when it was there because Michelle probably added it, who knows when, that just says, but they're still flat earthers. I was just laughing. Sorry, caught my attention. Anyways, but the Stanford Encyclopedia of Consciousness has pretty much it's an encyclopedia of all the different theories of consciousness that exist out there, and it's fascinating and something worth going through. So next week, we will be going through the last paper. This is going to be exciting. I am back. I am energized, and hopefully I won't make any dumb mistakes like I did now where you ended up like not being able to see the first half hour of the stream. Luckily, it's all there. You could rewind back. And so when I publish it all, it will be there for you to see. So this has been an awesome, awesome, awesome experience. I am very excited about the direction of these last few papers. I am going to be curious to see how Segundo-Ortin and Paco Calvo incorporate the entirety of everything without getting bogged down in those that say, don't even bother with this, and seeing kind of how this develops going forward, or the possibilities of how this can develop going forward. So I am not going to run the outro that I have, because again, it looks kind of silly that I'm running this beautiful outro with myself in the corner. I just feel like that's a waste. So I'm just going to stop here. If you have any questions at all, anything that you want to talk about, please reach out to me. Please remember to like, to subscribe, to share. All of this is necessary in order to get the algorithm to understand that people are interested in plant consciousness and in what is happening in the world of plants, and to share it. Plus, we have continuing conversations going on, plus events and activities, all related to how it is that we can co-create a better world with our plant friends and allies and collaborators, all about co-creation inside of the Naturally Conscious community. As always, that is in the show notes. You will find all the old and past episodes of Plant Consciousness Commentary in the Naturally Conscious community on YouTube, as well as on my website, just /commentary. And so remember, I am always here for you if you have questions, if you want to continue on the discussions. Next Tuesday, which is what, March, I think it's 11? Yes. Tuesday, March 11th, we have our next Plant Consciousness Commentary. The Plant Consciousness Commentary is a great opportunity for these types of deep discussions. So different than here, where obviously I am presenting to you the facts, I am giving you the information. Just like on Friday, we will be having our Plant Wisdom Book Club discussion. The Tuesdays plant-inspired masterclasses that happen once a month on the second Tuesday of the month as part of Blue Routes inside of the Naturally Conscious community is the number one place to have a live conversation on these topics. We are specifically going to be discussing plant communication today. In other words, why is the use, or how is the use of plant communication useful to us today, and what it is and how it can be used to further really some of the situations that are happening in the world. How can plant communication help us to find new solutions, to move in new directions, to think differently than the way we have thought up until now? In the Sprouts Writing and Community and Creativity group, we've been having different activities to write with and co-write with different plants to better understand the plant perspective. And I think that this conversation next Tuesday is going to be extremely helpful to get us out of the human thinking that got us into a lot of the situations and the problems that we're in today. So I'm very excited to be having this conversation with you. So if you head on over to the Naturally Conscious community, which is naturallyconsciouscommunity.com, you will find how to join Blooming Sprouts, which gives you access to many of the things I've already talked about today. It also gives you the mini voyage with plants, which allows you to exercise your plant communication skills and then further deep dive in with Reconnect with the Plant Kingdom, my course on plant-human communication and expression and exploration. So anyways, there's lots and lots of resources. They're all in the Naturally Conscious community. So with that, resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance. That's it for me. Tigria Gardenia, I'm out. Bye.